It is Locked On Jazz for the 21st of December. The Jazz come back on the road trip with a single win over the Detroit Pistons. Lauri Markkanen, the game, the versatility, the jump he's taking, the shooting, the clinic he put on against Detroit. We'll talk about it all. Plus, the game the Jazz needed to win, and a look at Detroit's rebuild, and is that actually what we're about to embark upon in the years ahead? It's all coming up on today's edition of Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free. We are available on all podcasting apps. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated. We are also available on YouTube, where you can be a part of the community during the show and interact with everyone, say hello, talk about our various things. Will Lauri Markkanen make the All-Star game is our question for you today. Hope so. And we'll dig into that a little bit. He was certainly terrific. We could have a little hiccup on the show today. The NBA.com stats page, which I have a bunch of Lauri Markkanen stuff I wanted to pull for today's show, is wonky. So we may do it together, which means it may or may not work. Or we may just totally have to fill out of nowhere. So we'll see. So this was an interesting one. I mean, this whole trip was super interesting because the Jazz, who I think, as we talked about the other day, are an imperfect team. Actually, I was on with Scotty G, had a great conversation with him. And my point on that show, by the way, about our team was one is we aren't built to win a championship. That wasn't the goal and the intention as the season started in any way, shape, or form. And when you build a championship caliber team, or even a team that's supposed to be in the Final Four of the West, or Final Four of the East, what you're really building is a team that's supposed to be able to absorb and handle any type of injury or moment. If something goes down or someone goes down, that you're trying to handle those moments and be able to withstand that injury because you have enough depth, you have enough guys on your team that you can be, can hold yourself as a top 4 team in the conference to get there in the playoffs. I've always said, I actually think if you're trying to win, you should be trying to build yourself to be a top 4 team. And we had done that very well the last few years. And I kind of think that's the standard. I know everybody wants a pure championship, but championships are super hard and take a lot of luck. So I always feel like if you're in the top 4 of your conference, you're in a position, win the first round, get to the second. Now you're in a position where hot shooting night or two, sprained ankle on the other side, whatever matchup, whatever it might be, can get you to the next stage. Then you're one step away to the NBA Finals, and then so that's always been the viewpoint of how I think you should be building your team. We didn't build our team this year for that. That's not Danny and Justin's and Ryan's goal. This is an imperfect roster, and the way my analogy I used on the air with Scotty G, I kind of liked, if I say so myself, which was that you see those birds flying in formation. And when those birds are flying in formation, we're relatively, everyone's in formation, we're pretty good. That's a pretty good little run by us, is if we have the whole foundation formation. We've got 2 birds, Mike Conley and Kelly Olynyk, that when they drop out of the formation and we get any turbulence or wind, whoa, we're not really capable of being able to handle that wind and keep our aerodynamics. We're all jacked up. So, we're in that formation and we don't have Kelly Olynyk for Cleveland. And even with that formation against Milwaukee, number 1 defensive team in the league, they just put their stamp on us and exerted their will, and we couldn't counter it. And then Cleveland, we were just bad. And in Cleveland, we didn't have Kelly Olynyk, and we got the big, huge pressure and win from the number 2 defense in the NBA and their incredible length. And without Kelly Olynyk, our birds and their formation suddenly got all wonky and out of control. Last night, we were missing a bird in our thing, but there was no wind. So we actually just kind of cruised and sailed pretty easily because Detroit's the 29th ranked defense in the NBA. And our talent level is superior to where they are, and they're not very good. They're really lacking a point guard with Cade Cunningham out for the year, and I don't even know if he's that point guard. But so I thought it was a really interesting trip because I don't think any of us really think that this roster is built in a way that it can go into Milwaukee and Cleveland, who are the second and third best teams in the NBA right now, or maybe third and fourth best teams in the NBA right now, and kind of dictate the way the game's going to be played. And then against the number 1 and 2 defenses, I don't think are either. And then we certainly aren't if our birds are not all in formation. Okay. And frankly, Mike Conley, which is a really important bird, probably the key bird in the front of the foundation, is not quite right yet since coming back from the injury. So I would say like he's almost got a clipped wing leading that formation right now. So when it got windy, funny how I'd mentioned that after being in Milwaukee, Detroit, and Cleveland. When it gets windy and it got cold and it got a little turbulent, we didn't have it. But when we played Detroit, who's 29th in the league defensively, and I talked to Dwayne Casey after the game, and he was like, we were beep, beep. And I was like, yeah, you weren't great. I think we are okay. And they're really, quite frankly, Detroit and San Antonio defensively are not connected to the rest of the league right now. They're bad. Lauri was amazing. And it was an interesting thing to watch, and this kind of plays into this with Lauri last night. So the first thing is with Lauri is he's just such a cool dude. Like, he's got a calmness to him and a commitment. I mean, this is the kid who, when I asked him earlier this year, who drove you the most? And he said it was him. And I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, when I was like 10, 11, 12 years old, I would go into the gym. In Finland, they only had 5 hours of sunlight a day during the winter. And I would go shoot, 50 elbow jump shots and chart how I did and write down the number and then set a new goal for the next time. So nobody else was driving me or pushing me. It's pretty incredible. Like, think if you're a parent and you have a kid, like at that age, to have a kid that's that dedicated, and he still is that committed. That's how he's a very serious guy. And it's interesting also talking to him about his move. He's got 3 brothers. His dad played for Roy Williams at Kansas, and his mom was a player on the national team. So and his brother Arrow, his oldest brother, played soccer for Dresden in Germany, Dresden Dynamo, I think, or Dynamo Dresden. And so, I mean, very athletic family. He says super, super tight family. And if you actually look at his career, I think part of what happens, he goes to Arizona for a year. He says that was the toughest year of his life, in that he was leaving Finland, leaving his family, going to Arizona. Nothing against Arizona, just the move at 17, 18 years old. And then before he ever gets settled, he enters the NBA draft, and then he goes to Chicago, where, that's a pretty big city. Helsinki is too. I don't know if he was from Helsinki, but that's a pretty big, right? That's a big jump. And you go to Chicago, and now you're a pro, and there's nothing that is settling about being an NBA rookie. I know it's cool and it's awesome, but you're the 7th pick of the draft. His high school is in Helsinki, so I do believe the academy. He's from a different spot in. But so he enters into the NBA career at 20 in Chicago, and then, that's probably, you're not settled, right? That's not a settling experience. And, he has Fred Hoiberg as his head coach on a not very good team. And then, as we've talked about, the second year, they kind of turn the ball over to him. And then, frankly, he's got Jim Boylan as a head coach, who may go down as one of the least good head coaches the NBA has seen with all the shenanigans that are going on. And he gets 2 years there. And if you actually look back at his last year in Chicago, he plays 51 games, but he shoots 48% and 40% from 3, and his effective field goal percentage is up at 59%. Like, there's real signs that this is happening. And then he goes to Cleveland, where they play him out of position as a 3. And I thought was a really interesting comments from J.B. Bickerstaff about how they put him in really impossible situations, guarding different people. He never complained. He embraced all of it, took all of it in stride. If you actually go back and look at Lauri's second, we all talk about Finland last year and Lauri, but if you actually go back and look at the second half of last year, there's some injuries to Evan Mobley, and he gets a larger role. And in the second half of last season, he clicks in. His numbers post All-Star break last year are 17 points, 6 rebounds, 46% from the floor, 38% from the 3, true shooting percentage of 62%, and a usage of 21%, which is kind of peaking him back up from a usage standpoint of where he was in that second year. We've talked about a lot on this show, where in the second year, Chicago did this weird thing where Chicago gave him a 25% usage rate in his second year, gave him the ball all the time, had him do all this stuff. He played the pick and roll. He played isolation. He did everything at 7 feet tall, and he failed at it to some extent. I mean, he struggled at it, and then they never gave him the ball again. Then his usage went right back to 21. Then it went to 20. And then last year, it was down at 19. His usage is back up to 24% right now. Usage is percentage of possessions used by your team. And everything is up on him. I mean, everything. It's crazy. His true shooting percentage, which it weighs the amount of times you go to the free throw line and your three-point shooting and your regular shooting. It's the best metric. If you actually look at it in his career, it's 55, 55, 56. Then as I talked about his last year in Chicago, there's signs. And he goes to 52. His last year in Chicago, by the way, these are harsh comments that if I saw Jim Boylan and Fred Hoiberg in person, I would probably retract pretty quickly. But like arguably his last year in Cleveland in Chicago is the first year he ever has a viable NBA head coach in Billy Donovan. Arguably, okay? Arguably. Maybe wrong, and Jim and Fred Hoiberg would tell me that seems unfair. But if you look at his true shooting percentage, which is where I was on that before taking that, maybe unnecessary shot, he was 55, 55, 56. He's 62 in his last year in Chicago. He's 62, I just said, in the second half of the season in Cleveland last year. True shooting percentage of 62 is really good. And then now he's at a totally different level. He's at 67%. Like, he's at a totally different level. He's taking less threes, going to the free throw line much more, still taking 44% of his shots at threes. Rebounding rate's high. His assist rate is by far his best of his career. His block rate is up as high. His turnover rate is too. Who cares? He's just remarkable. And last night, he showed all of that versatility that has made him absolutely terrific. So we'll talk a little bit more, dig into last night. But I thought the run that he's had in his story is important as we watch him emerge into a star right now. I mean, it's interesting. If you go back and look at some of the advanced metrics last year, he got no good looks in Cleveland. He got an A- in LeBron. He got an A- in Raptor as an offensive player. Like, there were a lot of signs that this was possible. There's nothing fluky, really, I guess what I'm saying about what's going on with Lauri Markkanen. We'll dig into last night to show you. Today's show is brought to you in part by our friends over at Intercap Lending. Steve Carter is the one that it is just great pleasure for me to be able to refer you to Steve Carter and tell you about Steve, because the work he puts in and the energy he puts toward our listeners just fires me up, and never, ever have had anything but maybe my favorite is when someone sends me the email and I'm like, oh, well, it's the most self-serving thing. I'll connect you with Steve, and then I'll put a little line in there that says, hey, keep me in the loop, because I know how it's going to go. And so it's so great to have you tell me, it was an amazing experience. I'm like, oh, good, we helped another person. I want to tell you also a little bit about a new program Intercap has. It's called FreeFi. And the program is for anyone that buys a home using Intercap Lending from now to March 2023. They'll have the ability to, when the interest rates dip, to take advantage of a refi, and they'll waive all the lending fees for that refi. So what that means is Intercap covers all of the costs, processing, underwriting fees. The client still will have to do the escrow and taxes, insurance, and title fees. They'll be part of the refi, but there will be no lending fees from Intercap. So what it's really like is you do a refi now, and then as the rates drop, you'll have the option down the road to pick them up, and the refi that is valid till March of 2025. So that gives you over 2 years to refi for free from Intercap to take advantage of this program. Give Steve Carter a call, 385-800-8528. That's 385-800-8528. Intercap Lending, NMLS number 1178666, over at Intercap Lending and Steve Carter. Thanks very much for tuning in today. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Bet Online. Bet Online nailed it last night. Had the Jazz as a favorite, and then the Jazz blew them out. You always like that. Bet Online, where the game begins. I'm supposed to have a visual on Bet Online. It's not showing up, and I don't know why. Bet Online, where for all your news, information, sports, go to betonline.net. Super week of NFL football coming up. You can jump aboard and play. Kicking off with the Thursday night game of Jacksonville and the Jets, which is a pick'em. NBA action tonight, full docket, fun one. Cavaliers hosting the Bucks. Cavaliers are a 2-point favorite in that marquee matchup. Another good one tonight, Portland and Oklahoma City. Portland, 4-point favorite. Dallas is a 3-point favorite in Minnesota against the Timberwolves. Dallas is scuffling, too. That's super interesting. Clippers are a 7.5-point favorite against the Hornets, and the Kings are a 6-point favorite against the Lakers. That's all over at betonline.net. So last night, Lauri was just terrific. And if you start to dig into the night, there's two things that jump out to me about it. When I go back to the kind of the night and the difference between Cleveland and Milwaukee, is that Lauri did a good job of hunting shots last night. At the same time, Lauri is not yet that kind of go-to guy who you can go give the ball to, and he is going to guarantee to go get you, 20 shots. 20 shots for him is a lot. And I think he hunted it a little bit. I also think that Detroit didn't do as good a job as taking it away as a good defensive team does with a system. And so there is an element with Lauri. Like I asked the opening question of the Will Hardy press conference yesterday and said, what I understand it's a team game and you got to figure these things out. But like, how do you have 22 points in one half and only get 2 shots in the second? And how do you balance that? Will's first comment was like, our offense was way better in the second half than the first half. So, you always have to be looking at it from a team concept, but we do need to do a better job of recognizing when Lauri's hot. And I think we saw a few moments in the game where like Will really demonstrably called a play to go get the ball to Lauri Markkanen. We also saw Lauri hunt some looks. So we saw some step back threes. We saw some just mid-range, isolated jab step shot. The variety of what he showed early, I think, is what's important. So he opens the game on a driving layup. He misses, actually. He then takes a step back three. He misses a three, then he takes another three as a jumper. Then he gets an isolation mid-ranger. He drives and dunks. He then takes a fadeaway two. So his opening of his game is 3 threes, 4 twos, a drive, a isolated jump shot, a fadeaway J, a step back, a catch and shoot. There's a multitude of things that he does in the first quarter. So in the first quarter, he takes 8 shots. 4 of them are threes. He hits 3 of them. He's on fire. But he also has a driving layup, a fadeaway jumper, a step back J, and a driving dunk. Like you're seeing, and Ron Boone made the point in postcast that, when you have that kind of variety, it's really hard for the defender to know where you're going to go. And even just 1 or 2 of these drives makes you stay honest. Now he opens the third quarter, he's just feeling it, right? He hits a jumper at the 10-12 mark for a 3, hits another one at the 8-11 mark, he makes another one at the 7-24 mark. Like he's feeling it at this point. He then does drive into a kind of a mid-range fadeaway jumper on his next possession to keep him honest. In the fourth, he does the same thing. He misses a 3, hits a 3, but then it's a driving layup, then a step-back jump shot, then an isolation jump shot. You just saw great variety from the various things that he did in this game. And so while Lauri is not quite at the point where like you can with Kevin Durant, like Kevin Durant is going to get 20 shots a night every night, probably more. And it's really interesting. If you listen to our play-by-play, pretty regularly I'll say like about the other team, hey, by the way, this is what you should expect from their shots. Like this is, how it works. Like if we're playing the Nets, it would be something of the sort of, all right, Kevin Durant takes 20, Kyrie takes 18, Seth Curry gets 7, Joe Harris gets 6. Like that's the way it works. And that is the way it works. On almost every night, those numbers actually come right to fruition. There's just very few nights where that's not the case. Durant played Brooklyn the night before. He had 22 shots. Durant has taken, I think, he averages 20 shots a game. He's taken 20 shots in 18 of his 30 games played this year. Like he gets his 20 shots. That's probably Lauri's next step. I don't know that he has that. Like Durant has a little bit more wiggle, a little bit more of a handle, but he does have the same 7-foot shooting window that Ron Boone's talking about in postcast. Like, and when you have that 7-foot shooting window, you get shots off. And you can't really stop someone from getting those shots off. And that's where Lauri last night might be Lauri's next step. And The fact is that next step is happening right now against Detroit, and that's fine. And then can he do it against a team that's a little bit more disciplined? And this is new. Like if you look back at last year in Cleveland, Lauri took 19 shots in a game all year last year. One all year. In early November, he has only 7 games all of last year with more than 15 shots. If you go back to 18-19, as we've talked about in his development, once he comes back from the injury to start the year, then he does do this. Like he takes 20 shots in 10 games. He shoots over 40% in only like 4 of them or something. Like it was not always pretty. But that's what he did. And then it went away, right? Then it went away. They just didn't mysteriously, Jim Boylan changed strategies or desires. So last night was the 4th time all year that Lauri Markkanen has taken 20 or more shots. It's the 8th time all year he's taken over 18. There's not a huge correlation. If he takes 18, we're 5-3. So there's not a massive correlation between get Lauri more shots and we win. What is interesting, by the way, if he takes 15, and I don't know, this seems maybe to be coincidental to me, but if Lauri takes 15 shots this year, we're 13-4. That feels like it's something. Maybe 13-4. So that feels like it's something if he takes 15 shots. Maybe what really it tells me, more than if Lauri takes 15 shots, we're 13-4. In the games where Lauri takes fewer than 15 shots, we've only won 4 games all year, is maybe the more telling comment there, right? In the games in which Lauri has taken 15 or fewer shots, our only wins are against Portland, Denver when we won by 21, Clippers where he went 7 of 11, had 23 points on 11 shot attempts, and then we beat the Clippers again when he only had 9 shots. So maybe it's more telling that he has to get these looks, and this is his next step. And to Will Hardy's point, it's not that easy. You just are not throwing in the ball at 15 feet and letting him pull the Kevin Durant turnaround jump shot, or letting him isolate at 24 feet on the right wing the way you do with KD. It's not quite Lauri's game. I don't know that it's in there to be that primary number one scorer, but he's gonna develop it for the next. This is the exciting part of the season. For the next 40 games, we're gonna see whether he can or not. The funniest part about Lauri last night is I'm in the hallway probably 45 minutes before tip-off, right by the locker room, and he walks by and lets out the biggest yawn. And I look at him like, wow. And he kind of sheepishly looks at me and says, don't worry, tip-off's in 40 minutes. And I was like, all right, go get your coffee. And we chuckled, and after the game, I was walking out, and he's like, see, that yawn was no big deal. I was like, it certainly wasn't. Nice job. But it's kind of tells you a little bit about Lauri. I said to him also, I was like, well, I just thought it was a sign of meditation and calmness that you just weren't getting the oxygen because you were so calm. And he chuckled a little bit and laughed about that. All right, I want to look at Detroit. And we'll take a second about last night's win as well, because that was certainly a needed win, and the 2 areas of focus by Will Hardy that he was certainly pushing and demanding out of his team last night. The show is brought to you in part by our friends over at BetterHelp. BetterHelp is kind of one of these things that I love in the modern world, that we can talk about these things. It kind of goes back to like Malik Beasley's opening press conference, where Malik just openly came out and talked about the therapy he's going through. It's just great. The world's not it's not the easiest thing we're all dealing with. So, and there's no user manual for it. So if it's not working for you and normal feels like you're stuck or it sucks, like that's not great. So navigating any of life's challenges can make you feel unsure. Career change, new relationship, whatever, becoming a parent, times of years. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of the challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of complex engine that you are. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient and accessible anywhere, 100% online. The world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp, has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed, vetted therapists, available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If your things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist at any point. That's pretty cool. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless search for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% on your first month at betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp, HELP. .com/LockedOnNBA. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. For your second listen, grab our good friends over at Locked On Sports Today, and always game to game on Locked On NBA. Hope you've caught that program. I left last night and wondered whether or not that we actually are going to be more like Detroit next year than we are like ourselves. Detroit's 8-25. I think there's a little frustration there of where they are in the process. They just don't have a point guard. Killian Hayes in his third year is still struggling to read the game and understand it, and he's not a very good shooter. 37% from the field and 32% from three. So they probably missed on that pick. If you look at them right now, Cade Cunningham, who's out for the year, which is really hurting them, is 21. And then Jaden Ivey's 20. And Sadiq Bey's 23. And Isaiah Stewart's 21. And Killian Hayes is 21. Jalen Duren's 19. And Marvin Bagley is 23. And then they've got these little veterans spliced in there. And Boyan at 33, Alec at 31, and Corey Joseph at 31 that try to make it better. Kevin Knox 20. They're just so young. And you just can't win that way. Like, it's exciting and it's fun for fans because they like young, but you can't, it just doesn't work. And that's where the rebuild gets so hard, and then those guys are all developing at the same time. Like, if you go back and look at what happened here, is Detroit got kind of stuck. They were 41-41. They got swept by the Milwaukee Bucks in the 18-19 season. And they had Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond, Luke Kennard. And Kennard was 23, and I just don't think they wanted to pay him yet. And Blake was kind of done. His legs were done at 30, and Drummond didn't really fit, and they had Reggie Jackson. And so 20 games into the 1920 season, they punt. And that turns out to be the COVID year, and they go 20-46. And then they win the lottery. And so in 2021, or no, they don't. They sign Jeremy Grant in the offseason while they start their rebuild. And actually, Blake stays for another 20 games next year. They start their rebuild, and their first set of draft picks is Killian Hayes and Sadiq Bey. So they really are now kind of a year and a half into the rebuild. They go 20-52, and then they win the lottery, and they get Cade Cunningham. And now, so it's working. Troy Weaver's now in control of it. And you're into the 21-22 season, and they go 23-59, and then they have a really good draft. I mean, they've done, feelingly like they've done everything right here. And they end up with Jaden Ivey, the fifth pick of the draft, who could be really good. They trade up to get him, and they trade up to get Jalen Duren, who I think is going to be really, really good as a center. And now they've got these pieces. Now, the first kind of bump in the road is that Cade Cunningham gets hurt. And so they lose a whole year of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey playing together right now. Sadiq Bey, you have to try to figure out what he fits. They've drafted Isaiah Stewart. Killian Hayes, I think, as I just said, they missed on. You're going to miss. He's the seventh pick of a draft. It's an unfortunate miss, but you're going to miss. Like, it feels to me that and now they're going back for one more lottery. Maybe they're going to get Victor Wembanyama, and then they really have this thing. Like, then it's over. And then Scoot Henderson gets interesting because they kind of have those positions filled with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. I look at Detroit, and it's an interesting rebuild. Like, everyone talks about everyone else's rebuild. They've done it without the picks. They don't have the cadre of picks that we've taken, or Oklahoma City's taken, or Houston's taken. They also are doing it in kind of a semi-major market that may or may not be able to recruit free agents here. In a year, they're going to have whatever their pick is this year. They're going to have Jaden Ivey, they're going to have Jalen Duren, they're going to have Cade Cunningham. And then, so they have their four main pieces, and then they're going to start, I think they'll be able to start adding free agent money. It's an interesting model. What's interesting to me about it is I just look at where we are, and right now, we're so, like, we're that bird formation where Mike Conley, who's 35 years old and is not going to be with us for much longer, at best, he's got a year or two left, and Kelly Olynyk are so vital to who we are, and then you look at their contracts, and and where they're going to be and who they're going to play for, and do we move them at some point in time because we're in a long version. And if you suddenly do move Kelly Olynyk and you suddenly move Mike Conley and you suddenly take 3 first-round draft picks next year, which would be hard to take all of them, but we have, suddenly you have a roster next year of 6 guys that are in their first or second year in the NBA. You don't have a natural point guard. And I think we end up, you could have a really, really good piece of your puzzle, and you have Lauri Markkanen as kind of the unique piece here at 24 years old who's bona fide, and you have Walker Kessler as your young developing center. You've got these 2 great pieces. But it gets interesting really fast on whether or not what happens. And this roster next year could be very similar to Detroit very quickly, where you're playing 5, 6, 7 young players along with Lowry as this, and then spice in 2 or 3 veterans and see what happens. And you could have, I think we could be there. And then you've really started. Then you've started the rebuild with our cadre of picks, and you've probably got, as Detroit is showing, 2 or 3 years and a few missed picks and a few great picks. And it's interesting to see what they've done and how that's going to play. I think sometimes I think they're a better model for us to look at than Oklahoma City and Houston. I'm not sure I always buy what. We'll see what happens with Oklahoma City and Houston. They certainly have a lot of picks, and it's going to be interesting to see how they play cash in on it. And have those picks so that we have that. But Detroit's done this uniquely in a manner. I mean, New Orleans is our perfect, right? New Orleans traded Drew Holiday and Anthony Davis the same way we traded Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, and then they got Zion Williamson. If we can go get the Zion Williamson equivalent, and similar to New Orleans, we got a buttload of talent for our players. We got Lauri Markkanen for Donovan Mitchell, and we got Walker Kessler for Rudy Gobert right now. And so we got these 2 pieces the way they got Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart and a bunch of interesting pieces. Really, Brandon Ingram. They got Brandon Ingram. We got Lauri Markkanen for Anthony Davis. That's really the comparison in New Orleans, and they got the number 1 pick. If we can go do that this year or next, then that changes the game for us. That's the model. Detroit's interesting because they did it. They're doing it without their guys had run it out. Blake Griffin had no value. Andre Drummond had no value. They didn't get anything for Luke Kennard. They really had run it all the way out. And so they're building this up from bare bones through draft picks without a collection of draft picks. So I think they're a really interesting one to watch because if they can pull this off, and obviously they've been fortunate. They got the number 1 pick in Cade Cunningham, who's now out for the year, so they've been unfortunate. And then I think they did a good job. I think Ivy will be okay. There's some aspects of his game that need to be roughed out, but he's young. And Jalen Duren's real. He's going to be good. So super interesting, I think, to look at these various different models. We've seen a bunch of them recently. We didn't even dig into Cleveland. Cleveland's the other one that's really quite the model. LeBron goes, Kyrie goes, and they draft Sexton, which might have been a little bit of a miss, and they get Garland, who seems to be a hit, and Mobley, who's a massive hit, Hall of Famer, and then they make a great trade to go get Jared Allen, and then they go all in for Donovan. They use their collection of things that they've acquired to go in all in for Donovan, and they give it all up. That's another really interesting model. I think Detroit at some point here needs to go all in for somebody also if they have the opportunity, and it complements where they are. But we'll see. Donovan, they got an MVP candidate, so Cleveland's super interesting because they got an MVP candidate out of it. All right, that is Locked On Jazz today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you have a good one. We'll talk tomorrow as we get ready for the Washington Wizards, our final game before Christmas. So please come out to the arena, support the group, be there for the holiday festivities. It's all part of Locked On Jazz. Holiday packs available at utahjazz.com.